She doesn't have much time left. Prepare yourselves. That sentence echoed through the freezing corridors of the royal household, like a blade cutting through the atmosphere that had already been heavy for months. A senior advisor stepped out of the emergency meeting room, his face pale, and moments later, the palace officially confirmed the tragic news concerning the future of Sarah Ferguson, sending the entire nation into a state of shock. Sarah, the woman who once beat cancer, who had challenged every scandal, and who had stood against an entire monarchy full of prejudice, now faces a test far more brutal than anything before. But what stunned the public was not just her condition, but what has been happening behind the royal family's closed doors. Meetings that never appeared on the schedule, panic-stricken faces, decisions signed hastily in the middle of the night, and especially the mysterious appearance of Prince Andrew, who is believed to have received a private notice from the royal physicians before the palace released the truth. An insider revealed that the family is locked in fierce arguments about her future, as things no one has ever heard of are being dragged into the light. What exactly is the palace hiding? Why did they have to call an emergency meeting at midnight? And is the tragic news they confirmed truly the whole story? Do you think Sarah Ferguson is hiding a secret that scares the royal family? Press 1 if you believe she is. Press 2 if you think the palace is still hiding something even worse. The unraveling didn't begin with a headline or a scandal. It began with a shift in tone, a tightening of palace corridors, and a growing sense that the monarchy under King Charles was preparing for its most drastic transformation in decades. After the renewed public backlash surrounding Prince Andrew in the spring of 2025, the palace faced pressure unlike anything since the aftermath of the Diana years. Andrew's financial privileges were questioned in Parliament. His long-standing residence at the Royal Lodge, with its sweeping lawns and 30 bedrooms, became a symbol of everything critics said the new monarchy could no longer afford, financially or morally. And standing beside Andrew, as she had for more than 3 decades, was Sarah Ferguson. Though divorced, she remained his closest ally, his emotional anchor, and for many, the only figure who could speak sense to him. But to others inside the palace, she was something far more problematic, a liability who refused to disappear. By early summer, private memos circulated among senior advisors outlining the Ferguson complication. They noted her strong public support, her persistence in attending family events, and her rumored plans to write a new book. For a monarchy intent on slimming down, silence was golden, and Fergie was not silent. Beatrice and Eugenie sensed the shift first. Invitations from the palace became noticeably fewer. Access to certain events quietly changed. When they asked for clarification, aides offered polite evasions. Behind closed doors, Camilla had begun arguing that the monarchy's credibility depended on drawing a firm line not just around Andrew, but around anyone still tied to him. Meanwhile, Sarah had troubles of her own. Her health battles, melanoma and breast cancer, left her physically weakened but spiritually defiant. She believed she could rebuild her role, perhaps even take on charitable duties again. But the whispers inside the palace painted a different picture. That Fergie's presence made Andrew harder to manage, the press harder to control, and the institution harder to protect. By September, the strategy was clear. The king's advisors drafted contingency plans for the removal of Andrew from all crown properties. And though her name wasn't written on those documents, everyone understood Fergie would be swept away with him. This was the quiet beginning, the slow tightening of winter. Long before the first snow fell, the first undeniable sign that something was deeply wrong arrived in early October, not through a scandal, nor a leak, but through an unexpected, almost chilling silence. Sarah Ferguson had always been a woman of movement, calling charities, attending low-profile gatherings, visiting Andrew at Windsor, or quietly supporting her daughters. But suddenly, without warning, she vanished from every circle that once felt familiar. At first, royal watchers assumed she was resting or recovering from one of her recent health treatments. After all, she had fought hard through both melanoma and breast cancer, a journey that had made her an unlikely symbol of resilience. Yet, even during her illnesses, Fergie had remained present, at least in spirit. She returned messages. She reassured friends. She showed up for her daughters. This time she didn't. Not a word, not a sighting, not a whisper. And then came the Frogmore lights. Residents near Frogmore House reported that for weeks, activity there increased late at night. Vans arriving quietly, staff moving boxes, security patrols doubling. It wasn't the usual bustle of renovations or routine maintenance. It felt deliberate, controlled, urgent. One insider described it simply. They were preparing for someone to leave, not arrive. Meanwhile, Andrew grew increasingly restless. He was seen pacing the grounds, refusing to answer questions from staff, visibly shaken in a way even those closest to him had never seen. An aide later claimed Andrew had been told his status within the royal estate was under final review, a euphemism that cut deeper than any formal reprimand. But the true breaking point came when Camilla summoned the Lord Chamberlain and Sir Clive Alderton to Clarence House. This wasn't unusual by itself. Senior royals often held strategy sessions. But the tone of the meeting stunned even seasoned officials. Camilla, usually composed, spoke with icy clarity. "We cannot preserve the crown while dragging the ghosts of past scandals behind us. Andrew stays. The monarchy sinks. Ferguson stays. The door to trouble never closes." For the first time, she explicitly named Sarah, and for the first time, she insisted the palace take action. William, informed later, disagreed privately, not because he thought Andrew deserved protection, but because he feared the public backlash of removing Fergie, a woman many saw as flawed yet fundamentally kind. But his voice was drowned out by the urgency of the moment. Charles, weakened by treatment and exhausted from balancing family loyalty with public duty, felt cornered by circumstance. "We proceed," he said during a brief meeting at Sandringham, two words that sealed the course of everything that followed. Back at Frogmore, Fergie began to sense the shift. At first, it was subtle, a canceled meeting here, a delayed response there. Then it became more unmistakable. A longtime aide informed her with a trembling voice that her scheduled attendance at a private charity dinner was no longer appropriate. And then the letter arrived. It was slipped under her door early in the morning, embossed with the royal crest, the kind of envelope that usually carried invitations or official thanks. But when she opened it, her hands shaking, she realized this was neither. It was a directive, cold, polished, clinical. A request, though everyone understood it was not a request, for Sarah Ferguson to begin formal discussions about vacating all Crown-owned residences. She dropped the letter on the floor and sank into the nearest chair. For a woman who had endured decades of public scrutiny, this was the first time she felt genuinely erased. Beatrice arrived an hour later, summoned by a trembling phone call from her mother. When she read the letter, she burst into tears, tears of frustration, helplessness, and fear. Eugenie followed soon after, equally devastated. Meanwhile, something else brewed quietly behind palace walls. Rumors circulated that Meghan Markle's team had reached out to a U.S. media outlet with exclusive background information about the Fergie situation, a move seen by some insiders as opportunistic, even predatory. Whether true or not, the rumor reached Camilla within hours, and instead of denying it, she used it as fuel. "Even across the ocean, they smell weakness," she said sharply. "We act now, or we lose control of the narrative." By mid-November, the machinery was in full motion. Legal teams drafted the winter order. Security reviewed exit protocols. Communications prepared a statement. Somber, brief, devastating. And on the evening of November 23rd, as frost thickened across the lawns of Frogmore House, Sarah Ferguson understood the truth at last. This wasn't just a transition. This wasn't reform. This was removal. And the storm she had hoped to outrun was now at her door. The night of November 23rd settled over Windsor like a dense, unmoving fog, the kind of winter darkness that feels heavier than usual, as if the sky itself knew a reckoning was coming. Across the grounds of Frogmore House, frost clung to the trees like pale lace, and the lamps along the garden paths flickered in the cold wind. Inside, however, the air burned with tension. Sarah Ferguson sat in the drawing room wrapped in a thick shawl, staring at the embers of a dying fire. On the table before her lay the letter, folded, refolded, then opened again, the one instructing her to prepare for relocation. It was written in the polished language of bureaucracy, but its meaning was unmistakable. Her life within the royal orbit would soon end. Beatrice and Eugenie sat beside her, their faces pale with the kind of worry only adult children understand when the parent they have always leaned on suddenly becomes the one who needs support. "Mommy," Beatrice whispered, "we'll fight this." Ma, Fergie shook her head. "You don't win battles already decided." But the battle wasn't over. Not yet. That same evening in Sandringham House, a private meeting unfolded behind thick oak doors. King Charles sat at the head of a long, gleaming table, looking thinner than in previous months, his illness a shadow he could no longer hide. Opposite him sat Queen Camilla, regal and composed, her expression betraying none of the storm brewing beneath. Lord Chamberlain, Andrew Parker, and Sir Clive Alderton completed the circle, folders in hand. On the table lay a document stamped, "Winter Order, Final Draft." Charles lifted his glasses. "We must be certain. This decision will not only shape the monarchy but define its future." Camilla leaned forward, her tone firm. "Certainty is exactly why we are here. The monarchy can't continue carrying the weight of Andrew and everything that comes with him, Sarah Ferguson included." There it was, the unvarnished truth. William arrived 15 minutes late, fresh from another difficult visit to Frogmore. He took the seat beside his father, rubbing a hand over his face. When he looked up, his expression carried the exhaustion of someone trapped between blood and duty. "Father," he said gently, "whatever we do, we must consider how it affects the girls. They've already endured enough." Camilla's eyes narrowed. "This is not about sentiment. It's about survival. The crown cannot afford another shadow." Her words hung in the air like frost. Even the fire burning in the hearth couldn't warm the room after that. Charles lifted the document, reading quietly. His eyes paused on Sarah's heartfelt note attached to the file, a simple trembling line. "I was part of this family once." His voice grew soft. "She has made mistakes, but she also served us in ways the public never saw." Camilla countered instantly. "And the public will never accept her again. We must move forward." "Charles." William swallowed hard. "There must be compassion." But compassion was becoming a luxury the monarchy could no longer afford. The scandals surrounding Prince Andrew, renewed lawsuits, resurfaced testimonies, aggressive press investigations, had intensified pressure to act decisively. And Fergie, despite her efforts to distance herself, had been pulled into the same tide. After 2 hours of deliberation, Charles finally pressed his hand on the table. "We proceed," 3 syllables that ended 3 decades of complicated belonging. At that exact moment, across the Atlantic, Meghan Markle appeared on a late-night talk show teaser clip, her voice dripping implication. "Some people cling to palaces long after they have lost the right to be there." Within minutes, the clip went viral, fueling speculation, anger, and conspiracy theories. Back at Frogmore, Sir Clive Alderton arrived with a carefully crafted transition plan, housing arrangements, financial provisions, confidentiality clauses, the architecture of Fergie's quiet removal. Sarah listened in dignified silence, her face unreadable. When he finished, she asked only one question. "Does the king know how this feels?" No one answered. Later, when the daughters had gone to rest, Sarah stepped outside onto the frost-covered terrace. The winter moon cast a silver glow over the garden, illuminating the paths she used to walk freely. She whispered into the cold air, "I hope they remember I tried." And somewhere beyond the palace walls, across continents, across screens, across time zones, millions waited to understand the full truth. Before we continue, may I ask you a simple, respectful question? From where are you watching this story unfold tonight? And what does strength mean to you in moments like these? Your perspective matters, especially in a moment this heavy. The morning of November 24th broke with a hardness that even seasoned royal watchers weren't prepared for. Dawn had barely touched the frost-covered lawns of Windsor when palace staff were rushed into briefing rooms, handed sealed packets, and instructed to prepare for a statement of significant constitutional weight. The phrase alone made hearts drop. It was language normally reserved for abdications, deaths, or the restructuring of the monarchy itself. Inside Buckingham Palace, the corridors echoed with muted footsteps as senior officials moved with urgency. The winter order, finalized only hours earlier, sat atop a polished oak table in the king's private study. Charles stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back as he looked out over a city still wrapped in early morning fog. His shoulders, once straight with authority, seemed heavier today, burdened not by the crown, but by the cost of leadership. At precisely 7:20 a.m., Queen Camilla entered. Her expression was carved in stone, her chin slightly raised. For weeks, she had pushed for this moment with unapologetic determination. Yet now, as she approached the desk, even she paused for a breath before lifting the document. "It's time," she said quietly. Charles turned, eyes clouded with exhaustion. "Time," he echoed, though the words seemed to fracture as it left his mouth. Minutes later, the king, accompanied by the Lord Chamberlain, descended the grand staircase toward the blue drawing room, where the cameras had been positioned before dawn. The room, usually warm with soft gold light, felt colder in the early light of winter. A velvet chair had been placed to the side for the king, though he waved it off, choosing to stand. At 8 a.m., the broadcast began. The statement was short, heartbreakingly short. In the ongoing effort to ensure the integrity and future of the monarchy, Her Majesty's household confirms that Sarah, Duchess of York, will step away permanently from all associations with the royal family. This transition will include her relocation from Crown Estate properties and the conclusion of her formal standing within the institution. There were no embellishments, no softening words, just a clean, devastating line through a woman's decades-long connection to the House of Windsor. Camilla watched from the side, her face unreadable. The king's voice wavered only once on the word permanently before he steadied himself. Within minutes, the statement ricocheted around the world. The BBC interrupted its programming. Networks across the US and Canada cut to breaking news. Social media erupted into a storm of disbelief, sympathy, outrage, and speculation. Many saw it as justice long overdue. Others viewed it as cruelty masked by protocol. But inside Frogmore House, the announcement landed like a blow to the chest. Sarah Ferguson was seated near the window, wrapped in a navy shawl, when the first headlines appeared on her phone. She read the words slowly, almost mechanically, as if her mind refused to absorb them fully. Beatrice and Eugenie rushed to her side. "Mommy, no," Eugenie whispered, tears already rising. Fergie set the phone down with surprising calm. "It's done," she said softly. "I always knew it might end like this. I just didn't think it would feel so cold." Andrew, informed moments later by his private aide, reportedly collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. His world, already stripped of titles, privileges, and relevance, now felt utterly dismantled. The last person who had stood beside him through decades of controversy had just been officially severed from the royal framework. Across the Atlantic, American outlets revisited Fergie's old interviews, highlighting her warmth, humor, and resilience. Many anchors expressed disbelief that the monarchy could take such a final, unforgiving step so close to the winter holidays, a season traditionally associated with unity. And in private rooms across Sandringham, palace aides spoke in whispers about what might happen next. Would Fergie comply quietly? Would she write a memoir? Would the public turn against the monarchy? But in the end, what mattered most wasn't speculation. It was the image that defined the day. Sarah Ferguson sitting alone in a quiet room, snow drifting outside the window, absorbing the reality that the family she once married into the family she had defended, supported, and forgiven, had finally and irrevocably shut its doors on her. The winter order had been executed. Exile had begun. In the hours following the winter order, the United Kingdom seemed to breathe in sharply and hold that breath, as if waiting for the true weight of the announcement to settle. Snow continued falling across the lawns of Windsor and Sandringham, turning every rooftop and pathway into a quiet tableau of white. Yet beneath that peaceful veneer, the emotional and political tremors were already spreading. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds formed quickly, some carrying flowers for Sarah Ferguson, others simply wanting to stand witness to the end of an era. People spoke in low tones, unsure whether anger, sadness, or resignation was the appropriate response. For many, Fergie represented something human inside a rigid institution: warmth, imperfection, humor, and resilience. The idea that she could be so decisively removed left a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. In the palace's internal offices, the machinery of transition clicked into motion with clinical precision. Communications staff prepared follow-up statements meant to clarify the scope of the winter order, while legal advisors finalized documents detailing Fergie's relocation, financial arrangements, and the lifetime confidentiality clause that would now bind her. These clauses were stricter than any previously issued, a sign of just how nervous the monarchy was about potential memoirs or interviews. King Charles remained secluded for most of the day. Those who saw him said he appeared emotionally drained, his usual calm replaced by a quiet sorrow. Later, in a brief private note to his advisors, he wrote, "There are decisions one makes for the crown, and there are decisions that cost the heart." William, on the other hand, carried a different burden. Though he had not defended Andrew's position, he felt deeply for Beatrice and Eugenie, women he'd grown up with. Women who had never sought the spotlight, yet found their lives reshaped by scandal and duty. William drove to Frogmore House just before dusk, offering what comfort he could. The hug he shared with Beatrice was long, silent, and heavy with unspoken understanding. Frogmore itself had grown still. Boxes had been moved into hallways. Lamps dimmed. The staff, many of whom had served Sarah for years, moved carefully, as though afraid to disturb the fragile mood of the house. Andrew paced restlessly from room to room, seeking answers no one could give. His fear was not just about losing status. It was about losing the one person who had remained loyal to him when the world turned its back. Sarah Ferguson, however, handled the aftermath with a quiet dignity that surprised even her critics. She walked the perimeter of the garden, her boots crunching through fresh snow, pausing occasionally to touch the icy branches. She knew this land, these walls, this air. They had been part of her life for decades, and now she had to say goodbye. Despite the harshness of the winter order, sympathy for Sarah spread across the Atlantic with remarkable speed. American media outlets, long fond of Fergie's candidness and approachable charm, framed the announcement as a cold dismissal of a survivor. Talk shows revisited her struggles with health, finances, and the intense public scrutiny she had endured, painting her not as a fallen duchess, but as a woman pushed aside by an unforgiving institution. Meanwhile, cracks quietly appeared within royal circles. Some senior figures felt the move was necessary. Others believed it was overly severe, born from pressure, rather than principle. And within that tension lay the seeds of future conflict, a sign that the House of Windsor's attempt to simplify itself might only complicate things further. As evening settled, the lights at Frogmore House dimmed one by one. Sarah stood at the upper window, watching the snowfall drift over the gardens for what might be the last time. She wasn't angry, not anymore, only tired. Tired of fighting battles decided long before she walked into the room. And somewhere deep within the palace walls, the monarchy exhaled, not in triumph, but in the uneasy silence that follows a decision no one truly wanted to make. The night deepened over Windsor, and the snowfall softened from steady flakes to a slow, drifting whisper, the kind of quiet that settles after something irreversible has taken place. In the dim upstairs room of Frogmore House, Sarah Ferguson closed the curtains with deliberate gentleness. The gardens she once walked every evening were now blurred in white, fading beneath the weight of winter. Behind her, the house felt unfamiliar, like a home already beginning to forget her presence. It was a strange grief, not the grief of death, nor the grief of betrayal, but the grief of erasure, to be told after decades of surviving storms that one no longer belonged in the story. It was a wound without a bandage, and yet Sarah, in all her resilience, did not break. She sat at the small writing desk near the window, lifted a pen, and breathed out slowly. Life had always asked much of her. Now it was asking something harder, to begin again. Meanwhile, at Sandringham, King Charles sat alone in his private study. The fire had burned low, his tea had gone cold, and in the silence, he finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of the decision he had signed. It was one thing to speak of duty in front of advisors, quite another to face the quiet truth. That duty often costs the heart far more than the crown. His journal lay open beside him, and in a moment of honesty, he wrote just 5 words. I hope she forgives me someday. Across the estate, William walked the path from the main house to the chapel, his hands in his pockets, his breath visible in the cold. He had tried to soften the blow for Beatrice and Eugenie, but he knew what this moment meant. A fracture that time might not fully heal. Yet he also knew that leadership often demanded choices that felt brutal in the moment but necessary in the long arc of history. And that, perhaps, is the deeper truth hidden beneath this royal tragedy. A truth that reaches far beyond palaces and titles. Life will always confront us with moments where we must choose between loyalty and responsibility, between comfort and integrity, between holding on and letting go. And sometimes the bravest choice is the one that breaks us a little in the process. From my own vantage point, as someone who has watched this story unfold piece by piece, I see something profoundly human in Sarah Ferguson's journey. She made mistakes, yes. She stumbled, yes, but she endured. She rose after every fall, and even in this winter exile, she carries something the monarchy could never grant and can never take away, the ability to rebuild from nothing. As the final lights went dark inside Frogmore House, Sarah whispered a line into the quiet room, a line only she heard. Tomorrow may not belong to the crown, but it still belongs to me. And that is where we leave her, standing on the edge of an uncertain future, but with a strength the House of Windsor underestimated for far too long. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of today's story. Amid unanswered secrets and the quiet footsteps behind the palace walls, we have walked together through a journey filled with emotions, tension, and lingering questions. The developments surrounding Sarah Ferguson are far from over, and each day continues to reveal new fragments of truth, power, and the hidden matters the royal family is still trying to keep in the shadows. If this story has given you a different perspective or a truth worth reflecting on, please leave a like so I know you want to keep uncovering the untold mysteries behind the monarchy. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss any of the investigations coming next. Every share from you is the greatest motivation for this channel to continue growing and bringing even more meaningful stories about the British royal family. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next video, where we continue to unlock the secrets that power never wants to reveal.